Since protesters stormed the U.S. Capitol, the FBI and the DOJ have arrested and charged hundreds of suspects in connection with the deadly riot. It also prompted U.S. Capitol Police Department reforms to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. News Center 7's John Bedell talked to two of the Miami Valley's top congressional leaders about security changes at the U.S. Capitol a year after the attack.
The U.S. Capitol Police Department is now changing its tactics 1 year after a mob stormed the building. We looked into some of those reforms and asked two of our top congressional leaders whether they think the appropriate Capitol security changes have been made. Right after the attack on the U.S. Capitol 1 year ago, it became clear there were multiple law enforcement and intelligence failures leading up to the attack. That included a written report from a top intelligence official with the Capitol Police Department issued to department leadership 3 days before the attack and warning of potential violence at the Capitol slipping through the cracks. That report was not acted upon. This week, the chief of the U.S. Capitol Police Department has been talking about wholesale changes for his department.
Could a January 6th happen again?
The short answer is I don't believe so, but there could be a situation where something unexpected happens that we're not prepared for. We've got to be in a posture where we think of everything and that we are trying to prepare for everything.
New U.S. Capitol Police training is a part of the improvements, and there are new intelligence procedures. Now, key intelligence is shared with rank-and-file officers. The department's intelligence unit has doubled in size, and it's improved the training of its analysts, all in an effort to make sure nothing like January 6th ever happens again. This week, in a one-on-one interview with Dayton Congressman Mike Turner, I asked him how he feels about security at the Capitol now and if he thinks the appropriate security changes have been made at the Capitol in the year since the attack.
There are a number of failures that occurred on January 6th, but I think the security that we have is appropriate, and I think certainly that the Capitol is safe.
In a virtual interview with Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown, I asked him the same question.
Yeah, I think that security is much better. I think the leadership in the Capitol Police was not well enough prepared, but it's clear that nobody really envisioned that the President of the United States would encourage people to riot against the government and against the Congress and to try to overturn the election. So I don't think anybody could have predicted what happened, but I think that the leadership at the Capitol Police was found wanting. I think the leadership's improved.
In the last year, Capitol Police say they've investigated a record number of threats made against lawmakers. Another change they've made, they've opened their first ever field offices to help investigate more of those threats directly and rely less on outside agencies. In the News Center, I'm John Bedell.